What's up, YouTube? I'm Trent McCare. Welcome to the Lean to the Left podcast, Season 1, Episode 6, podcast where I and future guests talk about local and national politics in an effort to drive the conversation in a way that helps 99% of Americans. I believe that's through progressive policies. Now let's jump into it so you can get your news and you can get out of here. We're going to start off today with one of the greatest feats in my lifetime by the American science community, I believe, and that's landing the second rover on Mars. A great feat of NASA. I'm going to pull up a video of that. We're going to watch that to start.
Straighten up and fly right maneuver, where the spacecraft will jettison the entry balance masses in preparation for parachute deploy and to roll over to give the radar a better look at the ground.
Years of preparation all coming down in one day.
Indicate shoot deploy.
The chute,
navigation has confirmed that the
everything
parachute
from
has
the
deployed,
chute
and we are
to
seeing
the wheels
significant
takes
deceleration
decades
in
to
the velocity.
design.
Our current velocity is 440 meters per second at an altitude of about 12 kilometers from the surface of Mars.
Heat shield set.
Perseverance is now slowed to subsonic speeds, and the heat shield has been separated. This allows both the radar and the cameras to get their first look at the surface. Current velocity is 145 meters per second at an altitude of about 9.5 kilometers above the surface.
This is honestly, that's the surface of another planet, and that's something that we sent there that's going to drive around and look for human life, or look for life. Not human life, obviously.
Nav filter converge. Velocity solution 3.3 meters per second. Altitude 7.4 kilometers.
Now has radar lock on the ground. Current velocity is about 100 meters per second, 6.6 kilometers above the surface of Mars.
I can't even imagine what it would feel like to be an engineer.
Perseverance is continuing to descend on the parachute. We are coming up on the initialization of terrain relative navigation and subsequently the priming of the landing engines. Our current velocity is about 90 meters per second at an altitude of 4.2 kilometers.
Spending just years of your life towards a 1 day, honestly a 1 hour event is just insane.
A valid solution and part of terrain relative navigation.
Priming. TBA is nominal.
We have priming of the landing engines.
Back shell set.
Current velocity is 83 meters per second at about 2.6 kilometers from the surface of Mars.
Close to the surface
confirmation that the
now.
back shell has
These
separated.
craters are huge.
We are currently performing the divert maneuver. Current velocity is about 75 meters per second at an altitude of about a kilometer off the surface of Mars.
TRN safety Bravo.
We have completed our terrain relative navigation. Current speed is about 30 meters per second, altitude of about 300 meters.
So they're choosing where to land the rover. You notice they avoided the craters so that the rover would be sure to get out.
Accordion, which means we are conducting the sky crane, about to conduct the sky crane maneuver. Sky crane maneuver
Lowering it down.
About 20 meters off the surface.
This is to make sure that it lands correctly, separated from the parachute.
Touchdown confirmed. Perseverance safely on the surface of Mars, ready to begin seeking the sands of past life.
What an incredible feat, honestly. So, that's what I feel when I feel patriotism. That's what I feel when I feel American exceptionalism. Feats like that. Right. All right. We're going to continue with the news. We're going to go from that to some other pretty good news. We had the Supreme Court on Monday rejected a Trump request to prevent his financial records from being accessed by prosecutors in the state of New York. So this was going on while he was president as well. The Supreme Court gave him some more deference in that situation, though it didn't prevent everything from happening. In the time that Trump spent on this, I think that it's an indication, if anything, that there's definitely something here, right? We've already seen in his tax returns that were released by the New York Times that there was definitely a fishy amount of value attributed to certain industries that Trump is involved in, right? He had a time where he declared that his golf courses were making $300 million, when in actuality he was losing $51 million. We had consulting fees paid to people that were employed at the same company, which is definitely a double dipping, where you can reduce your corporate income and then utilize that as a pass-through tax to the consultants. So there was definitely some financial shenanigans going on at a minimum, and he's calling it a witch hunt, which it definitely is, right? The problem is that Trump's a witch, right? I mean, it is a witch hunt. It's definitely the New York DA would not be going after Trump if he was not the ex-president, but he definitely is going to get in trouble, I would assume, very likely. I think that if you audited almost any billionaire in New York City, that you would be able to find financial irregularities, let's call them. And I think that Trump is just the target due to political reasons. I don't think that that's necessarily wrong, because he's doing illegal things, but I can concede that it definitely is a witch hunt. He just happens to be a witch. Finally, we're going to touch on two topics that are kind of surrounding AOC, or at least she is heavily involved, if not in the middle of these two quickie news topics, though we'll see how quick they are. First, we have the beginnings of what looks like a really bad move by Biden, in my opinion. Not just a bad move politically, but a bad move morally. I think this is a bad decision by Biden to reopen these facilities, right? The claim from his press secretary is that this is being reopened to handle all the unaccompanied minors. So these aren't separated children, these are unaccompanied minors, and they do not all fit in the current area where they are being held, right? The current facility. So this is the additional facility that is being opened under the Biden administration, the first migrant facility, as you can see. I think this picture is not representative, I would think. I don't think it's movie time in the middle of this facility. But they're claiming that this is due to COVID, so that they can follow COVID protocols and have social distancing and everything that comes along with that. But the reality is there's 700 children that are currently in cages, right? I mean, that's what this is. You can call them nice cages. You can call it a daycare for all I care, but it's not, right? This is children who are in jail, basically, for crossing the border unaccompanied. They're not free. They can't do what they need to do. They're not in foster care, especially, right? So it's really a bad policy decision in my mind. I think AOC does it really well on Twitter, which is where she does a lot of her commenting. And it's not okay, right? It's never been okay, no matter the party, no matter the president, no matter the POTUS, right? Same POTUS, different cages. Or different POTUS, same cages. So, you know, it's really just it's the system that's the problem, right? They said that there's no good options or something else to do. Well, you know, they could probably just go straight to foster care. right? They say they need to be vetted, but the foster care is a vetted system that already has people who can take in some of these, if not all these children. And if it's not adequate, you need to get more, right? There needs to be more incentive, more vetting, more people, more resources dedicated to this problem. We just do not need to have children from other countries in cages in our country, right? That's it at the end of the day. There's no really any other nuance or discussion. I don't want a 12-year-old from any country that came to America alone or with their parent in a cage. That's the long and short of it, right? So I'm going to support AOC. We're going to push Biden on this, right? He needs to backtrack. He needs to close this facility, and he needs to come up with a better option, right? I don't care that they claim these kids are going to school. Until I see videos of these kids playing in happy playgrounds with a parent per person, or a sit-in parent per person, basically advocating for them every day, then this is not adequate, right? These children need to be in loving homes, and if not in loving homes, in safe, places where they are free, not just that they feel free, right? So now to get to the other one where AOC is just as adjacent, I would say we're going to follow up on the Texas crisis, okay? So Texas has still a boil water notice as of yesterday for 3 million Texans. They don't have drinking water. They feel gross. I've seen pictures and videos from friends of mine sending me pictures of water that looks like milk. It's so cloudy. It's so white. It's disgusting. I wouldn't drink it, of course. They're not drinking it. It's not recommended to drink it. And from all accounts that I've heard, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel clean. And this needs to be addressed. This should be priority number 1 in Texas right now. This is what Ted Cruz should be doing instead of flying to Cancun. And you have AOC, right, who is doing everything that she can to make sure that those who are impacted by this disaster see that their needs are met, right? She raised $5 million. That's $5 million more than Ted Cruz raised, right? All of it. And she's not even from Texas. She's not even the representative for Texas, obviously. And you have our lieutenant governor who says to people who got $16,000 electricity bills from the shutdown, telling people that they should read the fine print, that kind of price gouging is built into the system and is a known quantity, and that if you are uneducated or ignorant about the situation and what you might see when you're paying hundreds of dollars a watt for energy, is unacceptable. That's an unacceptable response from our lieutenant governor, and he should pay for the bills. The problem is that they're talking about having taxpayers pay for it, right? The problem is that it still means that Gritty and all these other energy companies who did this gouging are still getting paid, and I'm paying for them, right? And I don't think any Texans should be paying these kind of exorbitant costs. I think that there needs to be regulation. There needs to be limitation, just like there is in Florida and a bunch of other states that I looked up, where you have hard caps on energy costs as a reflection of average pricing, right? And it's to prevent these instantaneous spikes. And that is what it is, as Trump would say. The last thing we're going to talk about when it comes to the crisis that happened in Texas is how close we were to this crisis being in another category, right? So some information came out. This source of this is the project editor for KUT. He also works at NPR station. This is Matt Largy. You have, this is basically a timeline of when sheds were requested and when outages happened, right? So on the left, you have our capacity, and then on the right, you have the, or on the, I'm sorry, on the x-axis, you have the time, right? So what can happen is when demand outruns supply, you have a frequency, or I'm sorry, on the left is frequency, right? 60 hertz is where the American electricity system runs, right? Some countries run at 50, we run at 60. And the minimum frequency that we hit is 59.32. Having a long period of time below the 59.4, which is a dangerous threshold, you can end up with catastrophic situations. So the breakdown on KUT was that we were 4 minutes and 30 seconds away from a total collapse that ERCOT is saying could have lasted for months or weeks at least. So right here, as it says, it's 60 hertz. Here's kind of a trend of that same graph we were looking at with this trend line, right? For 4 minutes and 23 seconds after it dipped, it had stayed below threshold for another 4 minutes and 37 seconds. The lights still would have been off. And if the frequency stays under the 60 hertz for 9 minutes, it would trigger cascading failure of the grid, which basically sends the grid into a tailspin. So it wouldn't have been a few million Americans without power, or Texans without power. It would have been every Texan, including hospitals, including life-saving equipment in people's homes. Would have been everything, right? All of our water facilities, all of our infrastructure. And this is how close we were, right? This is what happens when you deregulate. You risk these. And the power companies don't care about this. Right? This doesn't bother them. It doesn't bother them that they're risking this, because mitigating this risk eats into their profits. Right? That's the reality, is that this is a profit driven, as all private companies are. It's a profit driven industry and a profit driven enterprise. So they're not going to do things that eat into that. And that includes protecting Americans. That's it for the quickie news. We don't have that much big news for today. We're going to go over two big topics. First, we're going to review some really interesting data that came out of the New York Times SurveyMonkey poll. This is a bipartisan. SurveyMonkey is obviously bipartisan. New York Times is just the one that funds these polls. That's why they often have some sort of media outlet tied with some sort of survey company associated with it. And the New York Times found some really, really interesting information. Okay. So I'm going to skip to these charts. These are really interesting charts. So it shows, the first issue is which is the most important issue to voters, right? Jobs in the economy basically dominates every time this question is ever asked, as far as I've seen. Healthcare being number 2, especially when we're in a downturn like this. Healthcare number 2, a couple others filing in here at 5-7%, environment and immigration. We look at this by Republican, Independent, Democrat. Republicans think jobs in the economy are more important. Democrats think healthcare is the most important, right? So there's a pretty big swap right there. You have independents pretty in the middle on this topic, education being a big concern for an outlying concern, and immigration obviously an outlying concern as typical, and environmental, same thing, right? So there are some partisan ones in there. The education one was interesting to me. Also found the age breakdown, the older demographic obviously not as concerned about jobs, more concerned about healthcare. I think all that kind of makes sense. This is kind of how people break down. You have college grads less concerned about their jobs, high school more concerned, right? And then we have this, which I found really interesting, where 23% or 19% of all Americans, at least based on this survey, I'm going to quit giving that caveat, but right now, based on this survey, 19% saying that they were better off, 50% saying they are the same, and 29% saying they are worse off. This is pretty incredible considering unemployment is only at 10%, right? That means there's another 20% out there that's being negatively impacted in a significant way over the coronavirus. I think a lot of that could be, or this is just on financially, right? So this is interesting. I'm spending less. I think a lot of people who had active social lives that have been curtailed by the pandemic are seeing a lower spending rate. And so that means that a lot of people on this side are worse off, and not as many people as I would have thought are better off, to be honest. Because I think if you held your job through this time, that you're probably better off. And we'll see later that a lot of people have held their job. So looking ahead, do you think that you'll be better off in the future? So 32% thinks they'll be better off. I wish that this had a partisan breakdown, but I don't believe it does. Oh, it does. Look at that. Okay, this will be interesting. So Republicans are saying that everybody is almost exactly in line. This is all within the margin of error for sure. So then we have, how do you think you'll trend? So Democrats, having just elected Biden, are feeling positive, and Republicans are feeling worse, right? And what's interesting is this is financially, right? I don't know that this isn't just tied to their overall feelings, but they believe that Biden will put them in a financially worse position. I think if you are a 1%er, that's probably true. So there's no income breakdown, but there would be an education one. Curious about that. With the education, almost exactly the same between them. So it really doesn't break down by anything other than party IDs, which is really interesting. Business conditions. What do you think the next 12 months do we have? Good or bad times financially? You have not very many people, 13% of Democrats saying that we'll have a very good next 12 months. Somewhat good is almost a majority, a plurality of Democrats, mixed being basically all the rest, and Republicans being near 25% mixed, pretty much split between mixed, somewhat bad, and very bad. And independents falling on a bell curve, basically pulling some from the pessimistic side, some from the optimistic side. I think this is really just based on the election. I think that this would be almost flipped if you had the elections the other way. And I just don't see that politicians have that big an impact. Looking ahead, what would you say the most likely place to be in the next 5 years? Widespread unemployment and depression is 87% on the Republican side. That's crazy. That you think in 5 years that there will be periods of widespread unemployment. I wonder what widespread looks like. But continuous good economic times, all the way up to 50% for Democrats. 40% think that there will be widespread unemployment for 5 years. That's such a long time. And I also like widespread. That's a hard statement. Not really sure how I would categorize that myself. say under 5% maybe. So I don't think I personally would be in the continuous good economic times, I think. Especially with if the COVID relief bill comes through, especially if the Build Back Better plan comes through. But even with just the COVID relief, I think that gets a lot of people, especially kind of service industry, through these times. Thinking about people buying homes, I don't really care about that question. And now is the really interesting part. So on the infrastructure, so this is basically, should the Build Back Better plan happen, and should we just tax rich people for it, earning more than $400,000? I would consider that pretty rich, unless you live in New York City, San Francisco, LA, and then probably middle class, upper middle class, maybe upper class. Anyways, the approval of Republicans on this one is 37%. So almost 40% of Republicans approve of basically a second Biden stimulus, which is an infrastructure, clean energy, education based. I think that clean energy probably turns a lot of Republicans off. Independent overwhelmingly support. Democrats just 92%, right, say that this is what they want. 39% of Republicans strongly disapprove. I think that's to be expected. I think that we grabbed 40% of Republicans is pretty huge on a bill that I think has a pretty no-go word for Republicans. Poison pill. That's the word I was looking for. Poison pill word. And if you approve of the stimulus package, right? So this number is pretty similar between Republicans. 7%, 6% increase. The same on the decrease side, 6%. You had independents support this by even more, another 7% get on board with the stimulus plan, and then 97%, basically ubiquitous among Democrats, that we should pass the proposal, the Biden 1.9 Recovery Act. For businesses and individuals. I'd be curious if the $15 minimum wage was in here, if that would have changed it at all. But I mean, this is why Joe Manchin has got to get his stuff together when it comes to supporting this. This is just overwhelmingly supported. And now, how important are each of these topics within there? There are 3 topics within it. So the $1,400 checks are the most popular. They're even overwhelmingly supported by the Republicans. You have the money for COVID vaccine is even higher. This was the most surprising thing to me out of all of it, was that vaccine distribution money was the single highest supported Republican topic. And I would just not have expected that. And the Democrats, 96%, 93%, and then 96%, which is interesting that each of these are individually lower than the Democratic cumulative, but I think that's probably just some error. And money for state and local government, again, overwhelmingly. So that's the thing, is that the Republicans overwhelmingly support all of the individual, at least the major individual pieces. The $15 minimum wage, like I said, isn't in there, versus this 43% overall. And then finally, are you more concerned that they will go too big or too small? Democrats are concerned they're too small. Republicans are concerned they're too big. Independents split down the middle with a little bit on the too small side. I think that is indicative of America, right? A 50-50 split, basically. How worried are you that you will lose your job in the coming weeks? Everybody's pretty similarly worried and not worried. Republicans are a little bit less concerned, which is interesting that they're more concerned about the economy, but less concerned about their individual job. And they're pretty close to evenly receiving unemployment. They've almost evenly lost their job, if not Republicans losing it a little bit more. They've also lost their job a little bit more frequently. The same amount have returned to work. And then do you expect to return to the same job as you previously did? So this is a cumulative. You start here with all 3,000. If you've lost your job, only 606 have. So that's right in line with where the United States unemployment is overall, if not a little bit higher. Some of them have, so 10% have not returned to work. So that's actually almost exactly in line with the current 10% unemployment. So I think this is a pretty good representative sample on that front. And then some of the people within this group answered whether or not they believe that they will return to work at their prior companies. So that's information. That's how America's feeling. I align pretty closely with this. I think that was a lot of this just confirmed my suspicions about where America was. Last, we're going to get into the topic we've covered every week and will continue to cover until herd immunity, basically. And I'll give you an estimate for when I think that's going to be based on some information that I saw today. We have the COVID tracker that we use each time. We're also going to look at the COVID deaths first, as we do every week. So these death numbers are coming down exactly as I said. We have this spike. I'm not really sure what that uptick's from. I don't think that this will trend back up. I think we will continue to come down. We are now 33% off our peak. That's amazing, folks. We are headed in the right direction still. Looking at cases, they've also come down. They're starting to plateau. If you look at the 30 days, they actually went up a little bit. I think that this may not be a trend, but we will see. But the 7-day rolling average is looking really, really good. We are all the way down to 68,000. That is, and we had a peak below our summer peak, actually. So I think that it is extremely likely that America will hover between 102 and 50,000 for the next month or two, maybe dipping below 50,000 going forward. I'm not really sure how cases and deaths will align as the vaccine continues to roll out, but we will stay in tune with how those two factors trend together. So we're down this week from last week in vaccine dosage per week, right? So last week we were at 57 million. This week we are at 58 million. That is, or 68 million, I apologize, versus 57. And that's only 1.3 million doses. So that's a flat line, if not a decrease again in the doses rolled out, right? This is not a good sign. I'm not sure now if this is coming from the weather still, or if this is due to my concerns, as I've been saying in the past, about the overutilization, right? 90%, 85%, 85% in some of these states, 76%, right? When you're issuing that high of a percentage, I have concerns that we will have to slow down the single doses rollout as the virus continues to rage, right? So that's what we've seen with the trends, where we're starting to plateau. We're all the way down to 2.2k deaths, 20% down from last week. And there is positive information on the horizon. So looking at the vaccine tracker, this could be over extremely soon. An article came out just today that Johnson & Johnson may receive approval as soon as Friday. And that would be just incredible. Now, Johnson & Johnson has said they are not able to meet their dosage rollout, but they pledged 12 million by the end of February. They are admitting that they are not going to hit that. They're hitting 20 million by the end of March, so that's only 8 million additional on top of their original target, right? So 8 million over the next 30 days, if that was what they were able to produce per month, would be an additional nearly 300,000 per day, right? And that's significant. I don't think that that is insignificant. So that's great. That's on the horizon. They're guaranteeing 100 million doses by the end of June. And I think that that's totally an achievable target, right? I'm not familiar with their manufacturing, but based on everything I've heard and based on the fact that the United States government is already involved with their production, ensuring that they have the raw materials that they need, ensuring that they have all the capacity and logistics that they need, I'm really hopeful that there is a light at the end of the tunnel and that Johnson & Johnson is adding to that, right? So let's talk about the last thing. Let's talk about the timeline and let's talk about one last thing. With the vaccine, I've heard a lot of my friends as well as people on the news, especially Republicans, that if you get the vaccine, nothing changes, so why would I get it? Right? Dr. Fauci is coming out and saying you still need to mask, you still need to social distance, follow CDC guidelines, right? He's also come out and stated that if you've had the vaccine, you don't need to quarantine and you can hug your family, right? So to me, what Dr. Fauci is doing is riding a fine line. If I have my vaccine and I fake a vaccine card, which I can do, right? If I look up right now, I can get an image of a vaccine card, right? I could fake this. I could make this at my office, right? I take one of these, I copy it down, I put my information on there, I fill out some BS for this, and now I can go anywhere I want and claim that I've had a COVID vaccine, right? So you're going to have vaccinated individuals, as well as, I believe, anti-vaxxers attempting to utilize the vaccine as an excuse to not have to wear masks, right? Anti-maskers. Oh, I've already had the vaccine. I don't need to wear a mask. I don't need to wear a mask in CVS, in HEB, in Kroger, Walmart, on a plane, right? I've had the vaccine, they can claim. And that's the problem. I think that is really one of the number one reasons that Dr. Fauci doesn't want people to, as well as the CDC, doesn't want people to get the vaccine and think that all bets are off. You can do whatever you want. You don't need to follow any CDC guidance. And I think that that's the primary reason. The secondary reason is that just because you have 20%, that you could still get infected, right? Just because you've had the vaccine, you are not 100%, right? It's between 20 and 10%, depending on your vaccine, maybe even as low as 5%, that you could still get it and you can still get sick. And if you could have prevented that by wearing a mask or following social distancing guidelines, that would be better for the overall pandemic and attempting to eliminate this, right? If you get infected, you still are going to spread it. You still are going to you may even still be able to spread it. We're not totally sure if you have gotten the vaccine and you are inoculated. So, and the third one is that there's a degree that which people will be unsafe even if they aren't anti-maskers, right? Even if you had the vaccine, if you're washing your hands more, if you are following social distancing, right, you're more likely to not spread germs that would be on your mouth or in your mouth or on your hands or anything like that, right? And I think that's why there's a big difference between a grandparent at their house or at your house versus why can't I go to Six Flags or why can't I make out with somebody at a club, right? So let's ask, when will we be able to make out with strangers at clubs again? And Dr. Fauci, I was watching an interview just the other day. He initially had said April was kind of the window he was considering. He has shifted that to June to when he believes that vaccines will be available to all those that want one. And so then you can really start to open, especially if you put limitations on needing the vaccine, requiring the vaccine to go to concerts, to travel, those kind of activities. And then he said July, August, September, August being most likely for basically 100% open. And the New York Times put out an amazing interactive that shows very similar timelines, right? Herd immunity in the July, August window, right? 70 to 80%. And then fully vaccinated similarly, well, later, but having a significant amount of people vaccinated by July, August, basically full vaccination by October, November, right? So you can see that that is based on a current capacity 1.7 million shots per day, which is what we were at. We were at 1.3 million. We just looked at for the last 7 days. So it's even worse than this. But if the supply goes to 3 million, which we're hoping that it does soon, within the next month, probably, we could reach that by the beginning of summer. And then if you just had unlimited supply, basically everybody can get a shot almost immediately, right? You're looking at April, which is what Dr. Fauci's original April timeline was based on, right? Only 80,000 additional deaths, staying under 600,000 versus 100,000 from the current pace, right? So 20% decrease. I would bet that this is actually even higher, that this delta, because you can inoculate a lot of old people really fast with 5 million shots a day. Social distancing, ease up the restrictions when 15% of people are vaccinated, right? Keep measures in place. That's July versus June. And precautions now is you actually hit it a little bit sooner just because you have way more people getting vaccinated or getting infected. I apologize. Then they have variations, right? More contagious variations with no precautions, less contagious variation, the current variation, or less than that, the current variation, right? So this is what we're seeing from an immunity standpoint. This is the timeline. I think that by the summer, be pretty close to normal. I think that the red states will be basically fully back to normal by the summer. The national government will probably open up travel restrictions and things like that by the end of the summer for sure. And it'll just be up to the other countries to dictate when travel is unrestricted and how they're going to open. I haven't been following them as much, though I know some countries are not doing very well. So let's get to the final thing that we do every week. We're going to do the debunk of the day. This is everybody's favorite segment. This is an effort to prove that you can research politics on your own. You don't need to be me. You don't need to spend weeks every day researching everything. You can just look up things as they come into your life. Any topic can be done in a matter of minutes online, and we're going to do one live right here for the first time. I've never done prior research to these topics prior to this. Caught it that time. See what we get. Yellow. Oh, that's one from last week. I didn't add one. All right. Trump ran a balanced budget. All right. So let's look at Trump, or we don't even need to look up Trump. We can look up U.S. debt and deficit by year. I think we can look at a chart, very likely. Oh, that's going to be, oh, here we go. All right. I'd rather a chart. See if we can find one on images. So here we go. Here's one from the AP. So we got federal deficit. So that's per year. So we have average deficit from 1969 to 2019. We have 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So when Trump took over, we were at our average deficit for the last 40, 50 years. Negative 2.9%. You can see obviously a huge spike from Obama in the wake of the 2009, 2008 financial crisis. And you had 8 years of Obama where he obviously created a massive spike in 2009 and then tapered it down through his presidency all the way down to being below the average, which he obviously raised significantly, but being below when he took over in office in 2015, the last year. And then in 2016, you had Trump continuously increasing the federal budget, right? You look at another one. We have, this is from the Brookings Institute, got World War II. This is the federal debt, right? This continues to increase. We have a huge spike here. And then recently, we have spending. Spending went up or was pretty flat under Trump from 16 to 19, but revenue went down. This is from his tax, the Trump tax breaks, right? We have deficit as a percentage of GDP that actually also went down under Trump. Here's 2014, 15, 16, where he took over, continued to go down, right? I don't think I need to beat a dead horse over this, right? Here it is where Trump exactly took over. Annual deficit rising. Here's another one. Great Recession, right? I think this is exactly what a great one, right? So this is a Great Recession, and then here you have Trump taking over in 2016, ballooning it, and then continuing on that trend. Though some of that was warranted, obviously, with the pandemic at the very tail end with the stimulus. But there you have it, folks. Easily debunked that Trump increased the federal debt and deficit significantly. I can look this up in a partisan way, but I don't really need to. The reality is what it is. For decades, Republicans have been driving the debt in a way far greater than Democrats. but they're the ones who are fiscally responsible. That narrative is aggravating. It continued under Trump. I will continue to debunk it at every chance. I'm going to call that one debunked. All right. So that's it for today. Oh, the last thing. How can you help out this week? I apologize. So this week, I would really like anybody who can to chip in Texas. So AOC, part of her $5 million that she raised, you can chip in here. There's still millions of households without work, friends and family of mine who've been negatively impacted. You can see the recipients that this will go to: Central Texas Food Bank, Food Bank of the Rio Grande, Family and Elderly Care, Corazon Ministries, Indian Community Homeless Coalition, Houston Food Bank, North Texas Food Bank, the Bridge to Homeless Recovery Center, and Feeding Texas. All great nonpartisan organizations. Your money is not going to AOC. It's not going to the Democratic Party. It's going to those that need it in Texas, and there is a huge need. I can tell you that. So, with that, that's it for today's episode. It's been a good week. Enjoy it as best you can. Remember, the fight isn't over. We're live here every Thursday, 7 p.m. Central. If you like the content, like the video. I have a goal of 100 subscribers. So smash that subscribe button. Like it on YouTube. Follow me on Facebook. Today's the first day we're streaming on Facebook. I'll be back next week with another episode. And as always, I hope to see you there. Have a fantastic week.